He rode into Calder Flats on a Tuesday, which was the wrong day for anything to happen in that town. The livery was half empty. The saloon was quieter than a church, and the woman behind the bar at Holt's Dry Goods was wrapping a bruise on her wrist with a strip of flour sackcloth, her eyes on the door like she was counting seconds between lightning and thunder. His name was Dex Calhoun. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for work, a meal, and a place to sleep where the roof didn't leak on his face. He'd been riding for 11 days out of a town called Morrow Creek, where things had ended badly, in the way things sometimes do when a man stays too long in one place and starts to believe it's his. He had $31, a good horse, a bad shoulder, and the particular kind of quiet that settles into a man after he's stopped pretending the world owes him anything. He tied his horse at the post outside Holt's, pushed through the door, and that was the moment everything in his life turned on its hinge. The woman at the counter looked up. Her name was May Calloway. She was 24 years old, and she had the kind of stillness that isn't peace. It's the stillness of someone who has learned to make themselves small so that whatever's coming doesn't see them first. She had dark hair, pinned back with 2 wooden combs. Her dress was clean, but the hem had been repaired 3 times. The bruise on her wrist was fresh. Dex looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then he took off his hat, set it on the counter, and said he'd like to buy some coffee if she had it. She sold him the coffee. That was all. That was how it started. Not with drama or declaration. With coffee and a bruised wrist and a man who took his hat off indoors because his mother had raised him that way, and a woman who noticed. What came next would take weeks to fully reveal itself, and it would cost both of them something they hadn't planned on spending. But it would also give them something neither of them had allowed themselves to want. And by the time it was over, the people of Calder Flats would talk about Dex Calhoun the way small towns talk about the rare thing. Quietly, with a kind of reverence, the way you talk about weather that came through and cleaned the air. This is that story. The land that holds its breath. Calder Flats sat in a basin between 2 long ridgelines that caught the wind and funneled it down through the main street, like the land itself was trying to sweep the town clean. It was the kind of place that had been almost something once. There were 3 brick buildings on the main drag, which meant someone had believed in it enough to haul the materials. But the railroad had gone 20 miles north, and that belief had curdled into the particular stubbornness of people who stay somewhere, not because it's good, but because leaving feels like admitting defeat. The town had maybe 230 souls, give or take the ones who'd stopped counting themselves among the living. There was a sheriff named Hale Pruitt, who was not a bad man, but was a careful one, which in a town like Calder Flats meant the same thing as a slow one. There was a doctor who came through on the 3rd Thursday of every month. There was a preacher who'd given up on salvation, and now mostly preached about the weather. And there was Holt's Dry Goods, which was owned by a man named Clem Holt, who was 62 years old and had the disposition of a fence post, upright, weathered, and not given to leaning. May Calloway had come to work for Clem 8 months before Dex arrived. She'd come from somewhere east, and she'd come alone, which in 1887 was either brave or desperate, and usually both. Clem hadn't asked questions. He needed someone who could count change and lift a 50-pound sack of flour without making a production of it, and May could do both. He paid her fare and gave her the room above the store and didn't bother her, which was all she'd asked of the arrangement. The town had formed its opinions about her quickly, the way small towns do. Some of the women thought she was proud. Some of the men thought she was pretty. The children who came into the store with their mothers thought she was kind because she always found the penny candy without being asked, and children know things. What nobody in Calder Flats knew, what May had not told anyone, was where she'd come from or what she'd left behind. She was polite, and she was competent, and she kept her past locked behind her eyes like something in a box she'd stopped opening. There was a man back there, somewhere east. That much you could infer from the way she watched the door. But she never said his name, and nobody asked, because asking would mean caring, and caring was its own kind of risk. Dex Calhoun understood this without being told. He'd spent enough time around people who were running from something to recognize the posture. The slight tension in the shoulders, the peripheral awareness, the way a person positions themselves near a room's exit without consciously deciding to. He recognized it because he'd worn it himself once, a long time ago, and he still sometimes caught its ghost in his own body. He didn't ask May about it. He bought his coffee, got directions to the livery from a kid sitting on the porch, and went to see about his horse. The livery was run by a man named Orrin, who was missing 2 fingers on his left hand and made up for it in personality. He looked Dex over with the frank assessment of a man who spent his days reading animals and had gotten good at applying the same eye to people. "Passing through?" Orrin asked. "Looking for work," Dex said. Orrin looked at the horse. The horse was a Grula mare named Cass, gray-blue and compact, with the kind of calm that comes from being handled well. Orrin's opinion of Dex went up several notches. "Connolly Ranch might be hiring," Orrin said. "North of town, 3 miles. Tom Connolly's a fair man. Doesn't pay late." Dex thanked him, paid for a stall and feed, and walked back to Holt's to get supplies for the ride out. May was still behind the counter. She'd finished wrapping her wrist. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd learned not to waste motion, pulling items before he'd finished asking for them, making change without counting twice. He noticed she didn't ask his name. He didn't offer it. He was almost out the door when she said quietly, "The Connolly place is good work. Tom doesn't drink." He stopped, turned. She was already looking back down at the ledger in front of her. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once, the way you nod when you've said more than you meant to, and you're not sure yet if you regret it. He went out into the wind. The Connolly place. Tom Connolly was a wide man with a square face and the kind of handshake that told you everything about his character in 3 seconds. He was 50 years old and had built his ranch from a single section of hard-luck grassland into something real, and he wore that fact the way honest men wear their calluses, not for show, just as evidence of what they'd done. He had a wife named Ruth who fed the hands at a long table and expected them to wash before they sat down, and 2 sons, 15 and 12, who worked alongside the men and watched everything. The 12-year-old was named Eli. He had his mother's eyes and his father's jaw, and the kind of serious face that made you feel like you were being evaluated by someone who hadn't yet learned to pretend otherwise. He showed up at the corral the morning after Dex arrived and watched him work with Cass for 20 minutes without saying a word. Finally, he said, "She doesn't spook easy." "No," Dex said. "How'd you do that?" "Time," Dex said, "and not lying to her." Eli thought about this. "You can lie to a horse." "You can try," Dex said. "They know." The boy nodded slowly, storing this away somewhere. He came back the next morning and the morning after that. He didn't talk much. Neither did Dex. It was comfortable. Tom gave Dex the work he'd come for. Fence line, cattle, the kind of labor that asks everything from your body and nothing from your mind, which suited Dex fine. He was good at it. He was good at most physical work, not because he'd been born to it, but because he'd learned early that competence was the most reliable form of respect, and he'd wanted respect badly enough to earn it the hard way. The other hands were 3 men, a weathered Mexican named Fito, who'd been with Tom for 12 years and ran the operation in practice, if not in title, a young redhead named Sully, who talked constantly and meant well, and a quiet older man called Wash, who'd been everywhere and said nothing about any of it. They sized Dex up in the way of men who work close together and need to know who they're trusting with their backs. By the end of the first week, Fito had started assigning him the harder tasks without explanation, which was the highest compliment available. Dex rode into Calder Flats on Saturday evenings for supplies. He told himself it was practical. He needed things. Holt's was where you got things. This was logical. He was not a man who lied to himself, not anymore, So by the third Saturday, he acknowledged that he was also going because of May Calloway. Not in any way he'd have articulated aloud. He went because the store was calm when she was in it. Because she didn't ask him questions he didn't want to answer. Because she made change without making him feel like a transaction, which was rarer than it should have been. He noticed things. The way she moved the heavier stock herself, rather than asking for help, not out of pride, but out of habit. The habit of not needing people. The way she kept the penny candy in the same spot every time because the children expected it there. The way she looked at the door every time it opened, a half-second assessment, and then returned to whatever she was doing. He noticed the bruise faded from her wrist over 2 weeks, and then one morning, there was a new one, higher up, near the elbow. He said nothing. But he started arriving at the store a little later in the day, when the street was busier, and he took his time browsing, and he positioned himself without thinking about it, between the door and the counter. He didn't examine this behavior too closely. He just let it be what it was. On the fourth Saturday, a man came in while Dex was there. The man's name, Dex would learn later, was Garth Fenner. He was from somewhere east. He was well dressed in the way of men who spend money on the parts of themselves that show, and nothing else. He was perhaps 35, broad through the shoulders, and he had a way of entering a room that was just slightly too large for the space. Not loud, not aggressive, just present in a way that crowded everything else. May went still the moment he walked through the door, not visibly, not in a way anyone who wasn't watching for it would have caught. But Dex was watching, and he caught it. The slight elevation of her chin, the way her hand stopped moving, the breath she took that was a little too controlled. Fenner looked around the store. His eyes moved past Dex without interest and landed on May. "There you are," he said, like she was something he'd misplaced. May said, "Mr. Fenner." Her voice was even, professionally even, the kind of even that takes practice. "Thought I'd come by," Fenner said. He moved toward the counter with the unhurried ease of a man who'd never once in his life considered that he might not be welcome somewhere. "Long way to come just to see you won't talk to me." "I'm working," May said. "I can see that." He glanced at Dex then, a dismissive glance, the kind men like Fenner gave to men like Dex, a quick calculation that ended in irrelevance. He turned back to May. "We need to have a conversation, May." "I don't think we do." "I think differently." He put his hand on the counter, not threatening, just there, claiming the space. "What you took—" "I didn't take anything that wasn't mine," May said. The air in the store changed. It was a small change, the kind you feel in your chest before you hear it anywhere. Dex set down the tin of tobacco he'd been holding. He didn't move toward Fenner. He didn't say anything. He just turned so that he was facing the counter rather than the shelves, and he stood there, and he waited. Fenner felt it. He looked at Dex again. This time the look lasted longer. "You need something?" Fenner said. "Just waiting my turn," Dex said. It was said pleasantly, completely pleasantly. There was nothing in the tone to object to, but there was something in the way Dex was standing. Not aggressive, not posed, just entirely settled in himself, like a man who had nowhere else to be and no particular concern about how long this took. That communicated something Fenner understood perfectly. Fenner looked at May, then back at Dex. Then he smiled, the smile of a man cataloging something for later. "We'll talk," he said to May. "When you're not busy." He left. The door swung shut. The bell above it rang once and went quiet. May stood behind the counter. She didn't move for a moment. Then she picked up the pen she'd been holding and made a mark in the ledger that Dex was fairly certain wasn't a real entry. "Thank you," she said. She didn't look up. "I didn't do anything," Dex said. She looked up then. Her eyes were steady. "I know what you did." He bought his tobacco. He tipped his hat. He left. What silence carries. He asked Orrin about Fenner the next morning, in the casual way of a man making conversation at a livery. which was a place where casual conversation was currency. Orrin knew who Fenner was. Most people in the territory knew who Garth Fenner was in the way you know about weather systems, not because you've been in one, but because you've heard what they leave behind. He was from a family with money in Caldwell, which was 60 miles east. The money came from land originally, and then from the kind of business arrangements that didn't bear looking at too closely. He had a reputation for getting what he wanted, and what he wanted had, at some point in the recent past, apparently included May Calloway. They were engaged, Orrin said, in the careful tone of a man sharing information he's not sure he should. Or something like it. She left before the wedding, took some things with her, her own things far as anyone could tell, and came here. Dex absorbed this. He follow her before? He asked. This is the first I've seen him, Orrin said. But that doesn't mean much. It didn't mean much. Dex rode out to the Connolly place and spent the day mending fence line in the far north pasture, which was hard, solitary work, and he thought while he worked. He thought about the bruises. He thought about the way May had positioned herself behind the counter when Fenner came in, using it as a barrier. He thought about the way Fenner had said, "There you are," like she was property that had wandered off. He thought about a woman he'd known once, years ago, who'd had a man like that in her life. He thought about what it had taken for her to leave, and what it had cost her, and how long it had taken the world to understand that leaving was the bravest thing she'd ever done. He mended fence. The wind came down off the ridge and the grass moved in long silver waves. Cass stood ground-tied 20 feet away, her ears moving slowly, tracking sounds he couldn't hear. He didn't make any decisions that day. He just worked and thought and let the land do what land does. Absorb the noise until what's left is what actually matters. That evening at the bunkhouse, Fito was playing cards with Sully and Wash. Dex sat on his bunk and cleaned his rifle, which he hadn't needed to clean. Fito watched him do it without saying anything for a while. Then Fito said, without looking up from his cards, "There is a woman in town." It wasn't a question. "There is," Dex said, "and a problem. Looks like." Fito considered his cards. A man's problem or a job's problem? Dex thought about this. "I don't know yet." Fito nodded. He laid down a card. "When you know," he said, "you'll know what to do." This was the most Fito had said to him at one time since he'd arrived, and it was exactly enough. The next Saturday, Dex arrived in town and went to Holt's. May was there. Fenner was not. Dex bought coffee and a new pair of work gloves and a length of rope he didn't need, and he took his time about it. Near the end, when the store was empty, May said, without preamble, "He'll come back." "I know," Dex said. "He's not a man who gives up on things." "I gathered." She was quiet for a moment. She folded a piece of cloth on the counter, unfolded it, folded it again. "I'm not looking for someone to fight my battles." "I know that too." She looked at him. "Then what are you doing?" He considered this. It was a fair question, and it deserved a real answer. "I'm buying rope," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her face. Not a smile exactly, but the thing that lives next to a smile, the thing that comes before you've decided it's safe to smile. She looked back down at the cloth. "It's good rope," she said. "I can see that." He paid. He left. He rode back to the Connolly place with the rope coiled on his saddle, and the particular feeling of a man who has said exactly what he meant without saying it at all. The weight of a kept thing. 3 weeks passed. Fenner came back twice, but both times Dex was in the store when it happened, and both times the same thing occurred. Fenner made his approach, felt the quality of Dex's stillness, and retreated. Not dramatically, not with threats, just with that cataloging smile and the promise of later that was worse than a threat, because it had no edges to push against. The town noticed. Towns always notice. The women who came into Holt's on weekday mornings started to mention it to each other in the careful way of people who are paying attention, but don't want to be seen paying attention. Clem Holt noticed and said nothing to anyone. but he started leaving the store unlocked later in the evenings. Orrin noticed and started watching the road from Caldwell with more frequency than usual. Hale Pruitt, the sheriff, noticed and came into Holt's one afternoon and bought a box of matches he didn't need and stood near the window for a while, which was the closest thing to a statement he was capable of making. May noticed all of this. She was not a woman who missed things. She'd survived by not missing things, but she didn't know what to do with it. With the fact that a town she'd been living in for 8 months as a polite stranger had quietly, without announcement, started to close around her like a hand. She and Dex had fallen into a rhythm. He came on Saturdays. Sometimes he came on Wednesdays too, when the supply wagon from Caldwell came through and there was unloading to do, and he'd taken to helping with it without being asked. They talked about practical things, the store's inventory, the condition of the roads, the weather. They talked around the thing they were both aware of, which is to say they talked around Fenner and what he represented, and around whatever was growing between them, and around the fact that Dex had started arriving in town earlier and leaving later, and neither of them was pretending anymore that it was about rope. One Wednesday evening, after the wagon was unloaded and Clem had gone upstairs, May made 2 cups of coffee and set one on the counter in front of Dex without asking if he wanted it. He sat on the stool she'd put on the customer side of the counter, and they drank the coffee in the falling dark, while the lamp made a warm circle around them and the wind worked at the windows. After a while, she said, "His name was Garth Fenner. You probably know that." "I do," Dex said. "We were going to be married." She said it the way you say something you've rehearsed not saying. "I was 22. He had money and a house, and he seemed like the kind of man who knew what he wanted." She was quiet. "Turns out that's not always a good thing," she said. Dex didn't say anything. He held his coffee cup and he listened, which was what she needed from him. "He didn't hit me," she said. "Not at first. At first it was just the way he talked to me, like I was something he'd bought and wasn't sure he'd gotten full value on. And then it was the way he talked about me to other people. And then one day I said something he didn't like, and She stopped. "It wasn't the hitting that decided me. It was what he said after. He said, 'You made me do that.' And I thought, no, I didn't. And that was the first clear thought I'd had in 2 years." She looked at her coffee cup. "I took my mother's ring and the money I'd saved, and I left in the middle of the night," she said. "He says I stole from him. I didn't. Everything I took was mine. But he'll never see it that way because in his mind everything connected to him belongs to him." Dex set down his cup. "He's not wrong that he wants it back," he said. "He's wrong about what it is." She looked at him. "He wants back what left," Dex said. "That's not about a ring." She was quiet for a long time. The lamp flickered. Outside something moved on the street. A horse, a dog, the wind. "I'm not going back," she said. It was said quietly, but with the particular weight of something that has been said before, internally, hundreds of times, until it became the foundation of a self. "I know," Dex said. "I'm not asking you to—" "I know," he said again. "I'm not offering to fix it. I'm just here." She looked at him for a long time. The lamplight was in her eyes, and her hands were wrapped around the coffee cup, and she was 24 years old, and she had built herself a life out of nothing in a town that hadn't asked for her, and she was still here, still upright, still making change, without counting twice. "Why?" she said. "You don't know me." He thought about this. He thought about Morrow Creek, and the thing that had ended there, and the 11 days of riding, and the way he'd walked into this store on a Tuesday, and seen a woman wrapping a bruise, and felt something in his chest that wasn't pity, and wasn't desire, and wasn't anything he had a clean word for. Just recognition. The recognition of one careful, damaged person for another. "I know enough," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. The lamp burned. She didn't say anything else. Neither did he. They finished their coffee, and he helped her close up the store, and he rode back to the Connolly place in the dark, and the stars were very clear, and the land was very quiet, and he felt, for the first time in a long time, like he was somewhere he was supposed to be. When the door opens, Fenner came back on a Friday. Dex wasn't in town on Fridays. Fridays were work days, long ones, and he was 12 miles out on the North Range when it happened. He found out about it from Sully, who'd heard it from the blacksmith, who'd been across the street. Fenner had come into Holt's in the late afternoon. Clem had been in the back. May had been alone at the counter. Fenner had been... Sully's word was persuasive, which was the polite word for something that had left May with a red mark on her arm, and Clem Holt with the expression of a man who'd seen something he couldn't unsee. Dex heard this on Friday evening. He was in the Connolly bunkhouse. He was sitting on his bunk. He heard it, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he stood up and got his hat and his jacket. Fito was watching him from across the room. "Tomorrow," Fito said. Dex looked at him. "Tonight you are angry," Fito said. "Tomorrow you will be clear." Dex stood there. He was angry. He could feel it in his jaw, in his hands, in the controlled stillness that was the only shape his anger ever took. He thought about May behind that counter. He thought about the red mark on her arm. He sat back down. He didn't sleep much, but in the morning he was clear. He rode into Calder Flats before the store opened. He went to Holt's and knocked on the back door, which was the door to the staircase that led to May's room above. She came down in her work clothes, her hair not yet pinned, and when she saw it was him, she opened the door. She had a bruise on her forearm. Fresh. He looked at it. She let him look. "I'm going to talk to Pruitt," he said. "Pruitt won't do anything," she said. "Fenner's got money and Pruitt's got a job to keep." "Maybe, but I'm going to talk to him anyway." She looked at him. And then I'm going to find Fenner and have a conversation with him." "Dex." "Not the kind with fists," he said. "The other kind." She studied him. "What other kind?" "The kind where I explain to him that this is done," he said. "That he's done. That whatever he thinks he came here to collect, it isn't here anymore. And if he comes back into this store again, the next conversation will be different." She was quiet. "He won't listen." "Maybe not," Dex said, "but he'll hear it." She looked at him for a long time. The morning light was coming through the door behind him, and the street was still quiet, and she was standing in her doorway, with her hair down, and her bruised arm, and she was not a woman who needed saving, and they both knew it. "I don't want you getting hurt," she said. "I know. I mean it. I know you do." She looked at the street over his shoulder, then back at him. "Pruitt's usually at the jail by 8. He nodded. He turned to go. "Dex." He stopped. "Thank you." He put on his hat. "Don't thank me yet," he said. He went to see Pruitt. The conversation hail. Pruitt was a careful man, as has been said. He was not corrupt, which was something. He was not cruel. He was the kind of lawman who had learned early that the job was mostly about managing the space between what the law said and what people actually did, and that managing that space required a certain willingness to look away at the right moments. He listened to Dex. He listened with the patient, slightly pained expression of a man who knows he's being told something true and is already calculating the cost of acting on it. When Dex finished, Pruitt said, "Fenner hasn't technically broken any law." "He put his hands on her," Dex said. "Her word against his," Pruitt said. "And he's got family connections in Caldwell that reach all the way to the county seat." "I understand that," Dex said. "I'm not asking you to arrest him. I'm asking you to make it official that you know what's happening, so that if something escalates, there's a record of what led to it." Pruitt looked at him. "You planning on something escalating?" "I'm planning on it not," Dex said, "but I'd like the record either way." Pruitt thought about this. He was a careful man, but he was not, in the end, a coward. He picked up a pen and wrote something in the ledger on his desk. He wrote slowly, deliberately, in the way of a man making sure the ink was going to hold. "I'll ride out to wherever Fenner's staying," Pruitt said. "Have a word. Official capacity." "That's all I'm asking," Dex said. "I'll tell him the town's watching," Pruitt said, "which is true." "It is," Dex agreed. He left Pruitt's office and went looking for Fenner. He found him at the hotel, the only hotel in Calder Flats, 3 rooms above the saloon, which was not the kind of establishment a man with Fenner's pretensions would have chosen, which told Dex something about how long Fenner had planned to stay. He knocked on the door. Fenner opened it. The 2 men looked at each other. Fenner was in his shirt sleeves. He'd been shaving. He had the relaxed expression of a man who hadn't expected to be bothered and wasn't sure yet whether to be annoyed. "The cowboy," Fenner said. "Dex Calhoun," Dex said. "Mind if I come in?" "I do, actually." "All right," Dex said. He stayed in the doorway. "I'll keep it short." Fenner leaned against the door frame and crossed his arms. He was bigger than Dex by an inch and probably 20 pounds, and he had the confidence of a man who'd used his size before and expected it to work. "Say your piece." "May Calloway's done with you," Dex said. "She was done before she left Caldwell. She's been done every day since. She's going to stay done." "That's between me and May." "It was," Dex said. "Now it's between you and everyone in this town who's been watching what you've been doing to her." Fenner's expression didn't change much, just a slight hardening around the eyes. "You her man?" "No," Dex said. "I'm just a man who's here." "Doesn't seem like your business." "It became my business when you put a mark on her arm," Dex said. His voice was level, completely level. "You come back to that store, it becomes my business again, and the sheriff's business, and the business of every person in this town who knows what's been happening." Fenner was quiet. He was calculating. Dex could see it. The weighing of options, the assessment of risk, the particular arithmetic of a man who'd always gotten his way by making the cost of resistance too high. "She took something that belongs to me," Fenner said. "Her mother's ring belongs to her," Dex said. "Her life belongs to her. You don't have a claim on either of those things." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not," Dex said, "but I know what I'm saying. You're done here. Go home." He held Fenner's gaze. Fenner held his. This was the kind of moment that didn't need words to resolve. It needed only the question of which man was more willing to hold his ground. And Dex had been holding his ground since before Fenner had learned to use his size as an argument. Fenner uncrossed his arms. He reached for the door. "I'll do what I decide to do," he said. "You don't run this town." "No," Dex said, "but I'll be in it." He walked away down the hall. He didn't look back. He went downstairs and out into the street, and he stood in the morning sun for a moment and breathed. It wasn't over. He knew that. Men like Fenner didn't fold on the first conversation. But the conversation had been had, and it was on record with Pruitt, and the town knew, and those things mattered. They mattered because they changed the cost of what Fenner was doing. They made it visible. And visible things are harder to do than invisible ones. He went back to Holt's. What roots look like. May was behind the counter when he came in. Clem was there too, which was unusual for a Saturday morning. He was pretending to inventory the back shelves, which meant he was staying close without making a thing of it. Dex noted this and felt something that might have been gratitude. He told May about the conversation. He told her plainly, without embellishment. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He won't go." "Probably not right away," Dex said, "but he'll think about it." "He doesn't think about things the way you think about things," she said. "He thinks about winning. That's all." "Then he'll think about whether he can win," Dex said, "and he'll start to see that he can't." She looked at him. "You sound very certain." "I'm not certain," he said. "I'm just not afraid of him." She absorbed this. Most people are. "I know," he said. "That's been useful to him. It stops being useful when it stops being true." She looked at him for a long time. There was something in her face that he hadn't seen there before. Not hope exactly, which was too fragile a word for it, but something in the same family. The beginning of the belief that a thing might actually be different than it's been. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All right." She looked down at the counter, then up. "I've been thinking about leaving," she said. "Before you came. I'd been thinking that even if I built something here, he'd find it eventually and take it apart, and it would be better to just keep moving, stay ahead of it." "And now?" he said. She looked at him steadily. "Now I'm thinking I'm tired of running," she said. "I'm thinking this town is mine as much as anyone's. I'm thinking I've got a room and a job and Clem and—" She stopped. "And other things, and I don't want to leave them." Dex held her gaze. He didn't say anything. He let the words sit in the air between them, where they could be what they were. "I'm not going anywhere," he said finally. "For what it's worth." She nodded. She looked back down at the counter, but she was almost smiling, and Dex turned to look out the window so she could have that moment to herself. Outside, the wind was moving through the main street. A child ran past chasing a dog. Somewhere down the block, someone was hammering. The town was going about its business in the ordinary way of a place that intends to keep existing. And Dex stood in the window of Holt's dry goods and watched it and felt, with a clarity he hadn't felt in years, that he was standing exactly where he was supposed to be standing. The night it came to it. Fenner left Calder Flats on Monday. Dex heard this from Orrin on Tuesday morning, when he came in to check on Cass. Fenner had settled his bill at the hotel, loaded his horse, and ridden east on the Caldwell Road. The hotel keeper had heard him say something about unfinished business, which was the kind of thing men like Fenner said when they were retreating, but didn't want to call it that. The town relaxed. Not completely, not permanently, but the way a body relaxes when a tension that's been there so long you've stopped noticing it finally releases. People's shoulders came down a quarter inch. Conversations in the street lasted a little longer. May Calloway came out from behind the counter and started arranging the front window display, which she'd been meaning to do for weeks, and 3 women stopped to watch, and one of them came in to tell her it looked nice. Dex told himself it was over. He almost believed it. He went back to the Connolly place and worked. He mended fence and moved cattle, and helped Fito repair the roof of the near barn, and taught Eli how to properly throw a loop, which took 4 afternoons and resulted in the boy roping a fence post, a water trough, and once, memorably, one of the barn cats, who was neither injured nor amused. He ate Ruth Connolly's cooking at the long table, and listened to Sully talk, and watched Wash not talk, and felt the rhythm of the work settle into him like something he'd been missing. Tom Connolly found him one evening after supper, sitting on the fence of the near corral, watching Cass in the last light. "Your good work," Tom said. He said it the way he said most things, directly, without preamble. "I'd like to keep you on through the winter if you're willing." Dex looked at him. "I'm willing," he said. Tom nodded. That was the whole conversation. But it was the kind of conversation that changes things, quietly and permanently, the way a nail driven all the way home changes the board it's in. He went to town that Saturday. May was there. She'd rearranged the front window display again. She'd found some old bolts of fabric in the back and used them for color, which made the whole front of the store look less like a place where people came out of necessity, and more like a place they might come because they wanted to. It was a small thing. It was also not a small thing. "He's gone," she said. "For now," Dex said. She nodded. She knew. "For now is enough," she said. "For now is what we have." He bought coffee. He bought a new pair of socks, which he actually needed. He stayed until Clem closed up, and then he and May stood on the porch of the store in the evening air and talked about nothing in particular. The weather, the Connolly place, the cat she'd been feeding that had started sleeping on the steps. He was about to go for his horse when the rider came up the main street. He knew before he could see the face. There was something in the way the horse moved, fast, purposeful, the gait of an animal that had been pushed hard and recently. He knew, and he felt the knowing settle into him without surprise, because this was always how it went with men like Fenner. They left, and they came back. The leaving was just the gathering of resolve. Fenner pulled up in front of Holt's. He'd been drinking. Not heavily. He was still controlled, still himself, but enough. Enough to have burned away whatever calculation had been making him careful. He looked at May. He looked at Dex. He got off his horse. "I told you," he said to May. "We were going to talk." May didn't move. She was standing on the porch of her store, in front of her store, and she didn't move an inch. "There's nothing to talk about," she said. Fenner took a step toward the porch. "The ring is mine," she said. "My mother's ring is mine. Go home, Garth." He took another step. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who has convinced himself that what he's doing is reasonable, which is the most dangerous expression there is. Dex stepped forward. Not between them. Not yet. He stepped off the porch and onto the ground, and he stood there, and he said, "Fenner." Fenner stopped. He looked at Dex. "You again." "Me again," Dex said. The street was not empty. It was evening, and there were people. The blacksmith, 2 women from the dry goods, a man from the saloon who'd come out to see what the noise was. Pruitt was walking up from the direction of the jail, unhurried but present. Fenner saw all of this. He was drunk enough to be angry and sober enough to count. "You think you're protecting her," Fenner said to Dex. His voice had an edge in it now, the edge that comes when a man's dignity is threatened in front of witnesses. "You think you know what this is." "I know what it looks like," Dex said. "You don't know anything about her," Fenner said. "About what she is, what she did." "I know what she is," Dex said. "She's a woman standing on her own porch in her own town. And you're a man who rode 60 miles to put his hands on her again. That's what I know." Fenner's jaw tightened. He looked at Dex with something that was past calculation now, something rawer. "Get out of my way." "No," Dex said. One word, flat and final as a door closing. Fenner moved. He came fast and with the confidence of a man who'd won physical arguments before, and he was bigger, and he was angry, and he had the momentum of someone who'd stopped thinking. What happened next was brief. Dex was not a large man. He was not a dramatic man. He had no interest in performance. He had spent years doing hard physical labor, and before that, he had spent a period of his life in circumstances he didn't talk about that had taught him certain things about how bodies moved under pressure. He sidestepped Fenner's rush with the economy of a man who has done this before, caught the arm, and put Fenner face down in the dirt of the main street of Calder Flats with a controlled efficiency that was almost quiet. Fenner hit the ground hard. He lay there for a moment, winded, furious, and suddenly very aware of how many people were watching. Pruitt arrived. He stood over Fenner with his hands on his belt. "Evening, Mr. Fenner," he said. "You're going to want to stay down there for a moment." Fenner stayed down. Dex stepped back. He looked up at May on the porch. She was standing very still, her hands at her sides, her face composed in that careful way. But her eyes were something different. Her eyes were the eyes of a woman who has just watched something she'd stopped believing was possible. He nodded at her, once. She nodded back. Pruitt helped Fenner up and walked him toward the jail. Not roughly, not gently, just firmly in the way of a man doing his job. The people on the street went back to their business, or pretended to. The blacksmith went back inside. The women went back to their walking. Dex stood in the street for a moment. Then he went up on the porch and sat down on the step, and May sat down beside him, and neither of them said anything for a long time. The stars were coming out. The wind was warm. The cat she'd been feeding came up the steps and settled between them, with the complete indifference of a cat that has decided 2 people are acceptable. "You all right?" Dex said finally. "Yes," she said. Then, after a moment, "No. But I will be." He nodded. He reached down and scratched the cat's ears. The cat tolerated this. He'll have to leave now, May said. Pruitt can hold him overnight, and then he'll have to leave. He won't be able to come back after this. Not without... She stopped. Not without it being something bigger. No, Dex said. He won't. Because of you, she said. Because of you, he said. You stayed. You didn't run. You stood on your own porch and told him no. He thought about it. I just made sure there was someone standing with you. She was quiet. The stars were very clear. Somewhere down the street, someone was playing a fiddle, badly but enthusiastically. Dex, she said. Yeah. I'm glad you came into the store that Tuesday. He looked at her. She was looking straight ahead, at the street, at the dark shapes of the buildings, at the ordinary miraculous fact of a town going about its evening. So am I, he said. The cat purred. The fiddle played. The wind moved through the empty street. What Stays Fenner left Calder Flats the next morning. Pruitt walked him to his horse and watched him ride east, and then went back to his office and wrote it all down in the ledger in his careful hand. He sent a letter to the county seat that same day. He didn't expect much to come of it, but he sent it anyway, because a record is a record, and records accumulate, and sometimes that's enough. It was enough. Fenner did not come back. There were men in Caldwell, it turned out, who had their own reasons to be glad of a formal record of his behavior. Men who'd watched him operate for years and had been waiting for something they could point to. The letter from Pruitt became one of several things that eventually made Garth Fenner's life in Caldwell considerably less comfortable than it had been. He didn't go to prison. Men like him rarely did. But he lost standing, and standing was what he'd been living on, and losing it cost him in ways that mattered. May heard about this months later, in a letter from a woman in Caldwell she'd known slightly. She read the letter in the store, behind the counter, and then she folded it and put it in her apron pocket and went back to work. When Dex came in that Saturday, she told him about it without much ceremony. Good, he said. That's all? She said. That's all, he said. She looked at him for a moment and then she laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere unguarded, and it was the first time he'd heard it, and it was something. He smiled, which was also something, because he didn't do it often enough that it had lost its meaning. The winter came to Calder Flats the way winter comes to that country. Without apology, all at once, the sky going white, and the ground going hard, and the wind finding every gap in every building like it had a list. The Connolly place hunkered down. The work changed. Less range riding, more barn work, the particular intimacy of a small crew spending long cold days in close quarters. Sully talked more. Wash talked less. Fido kept everything running with the quiet authority of a man who has outlasted every problem he's ever faced. Eli Connolly came to the barn every morning before school to check on the horses. He and Dex had developed the kind of friendship that exists between a grown man and a boy who are both more comfortable with silence than most people. They worked alongside each other and talked when there was something worth saying, and didn't when there wasn't. And the boy was learning things that couldn't be taught in any school, about patience and horses and the particular dignity of work done right. One morning in November, Eli said, "You going to marry May Calloway?" Dex kept working. "That's a personal question," he said. "I know," Eli said. He was brushing one of the draft horses with the methodical concentration he brought to everything. "Ma says you should." "Your ma says that?" "She says you look at her the way Pa looks at her." He paused. "Ma, not May. I understood," Dex said. Eli went back to brushing. "I think you should," he said. "She seems like she needs someone steady." Dex considered this. "She doesn't need anyone," he said. "She's been doing fine on her own." Eli thought about this. "Maybe," he said, "but she'd do better." Dex looked at the boy. 12 years old, with his mother's eyes and his father's jaw, and the unsettling clarity of a child who has not yet learned to complicate simple truths. Maybe, Dex said. He went to town that Saturday with a particular awareness of himself that he hadn't had before. Or rather, that he'd had for weeks but had been calling something else. He went to Holt's. May was there. Clem had gone to visit his sister in the next county for the week, which meant May was running the store alone, which she was doing with the same competence she brought to everything. The store was warm. The stove in the corner was going. It smelled like coffee and pine, and the particular dry goods smell of cloth and flour and soap that Dex had come to associate with this place, with her. She looked up when he came in. She smiled. Not the almost smile, not the careful professional expression. The real one, the one she'd started giving him somewhere in the past months without either of them marking the exact moment it had begun. "You're early," she said. "Roads were clear," he said. He bought coffee. He sat on the stool. They talked about the store, the winter, the Connolly place. She told him about a family that had come through on their way west, a young couple with a baby, and how she'd given them extra provisions at cost because they'd looked like they needed it more than the margin did. He told her about Eli and the barn cat, which had made its way to the Connolly place and was now living in the hayloft and had been named, by Eli, Captain. "Captain," she said. He felt strongly about it, Dex said. She laughed. There it was again. That real laugh. Easy now. Present in the room like something that belonged there. He looked at her. She was pouring herself coffee, her back half turned to him, and the lamplight was in her hair, and the stove was warm, and the wind was at the windows. And he thought about what Eli had said. She'd do better. And he thought about the 11 days of riding, and the Tuesday he'd walked through this door, and the coffee she'd sold him, and every Saturday since. And he thought about the Connolly place, and Tom's offer, and the winter ahead, and the spring after that. He thought about what it meant to be somewhere you were supposed to be. "May," he said. She turned. She looked at him. She read his face the way she read everything, carefully, completely, missing nothing. She set down the coffee pot. "I know," she said, quietly, certain. He looked at her. "I haven't said anything yet." "I know," she said again, and she was smiling. He was quiet for a moment. The stove ticked. The wind worked at the glass. "I'd like to stay," he said. "Not just through the winter. I'd like to stay." She held his gaze. "Then stay," she said. That was all. That was the whole of it. Two people in a warm store in a cold November, the wind outside and the lamp between them, saying the simplest possible things, because the simple things were the true ones, and they'd both spent enough time saying things that weren't true to know the difference. He stayed. What the town remembers. They were married in the spring, in the practical way of people who don't need ceremony to make a thing real, but who understand that a town needs its moments. Pruitt signed the papers. Ruth Connolly cried. Eli did not cry but stood very straight and shook Dex's hand afterward with a gravity that made Tom Connolly turn away to hide his expression. Fito brought a bottle of something from his saddlebag that he said was from his grandmother's recipe and declined to elaborate. Seeley talked for most of the afternoon. Wash said at one point, "Good," which was the longest speech anyone had heard from him in months. Clem Holt gave May a raise and the use of the store's back room as an office, which meant she could start doing the accounts properly and expand the ordering, which she'd been wanting to do for a year. He did this without making a thing of it, in the way of a man who has been watching someone be capable for a long time and is finally in a position to acknowledge it formally. The town of Calder Flats did not change dramatically. It was still a small place in a basin between two ridgelines, still windswept and stubborn, still the kind of town that had been almost something and had decided to be itself instead. But it had a quality now that it hadn't quite had before. A quality you couldn't point to directly, but could feel in the way people moved through the main street, the way they stopped to talk, The way the store's front window with its bolts of colored fabric was a small, bright thing in the gray of winter and the dust of summer. Dex worked the Connolly place through another winter and into the spring, and then Tom offered him a partnership stake, which was the kind of offer that doesn't come to men who haven't earned it completely, and Dex accepted it with the same plain directness with which it was given. He rode into town on Saturdays, always. He tied Cass at the post outside Holt's and went inside and bought things he needed and some things he didn't, and stood at the counter and talked with May in the way of two people who have built something real together. Not without difficulty, not wit.